Welcome to the Artisan and Reenactors Market podcast. This is a chance to hear from the merchants, makers, living history experts and performers who are part of the ARM family. Hear them talk passionately about their products and history. The ARM family welcomes new traders, groups, living history and performers. See our website armarket.uk to find out more. In this episode, I talk with Janet from Linen and Needle and the sister company Forgotten Beads about her bespoke tailoring, heraldic embroidery, and some historic facts.
They find more pins in the Thames than anything else. If you look at the embroidery in late 14th, early 15th, you'll find not so many facial features. They're normally the heads are turned slightly.
Oh, okay, yes.
And that's unfortunate because the Black Plague happened in the middle and they lost half the embroiderers.
I also talk with Paul from Diabolus in Musica about his reenactment.
There's nothing like a half-timbered wall for standing up against and swanning around.
About how he became a musician and medieval instrument craftsman.
Got in with a bad crowd and started playing crumb horns, and then started coveting hurdy-gurdies and Renaissance guitars
and some historical insights into the medieval world.
Because of that carving, it was gifted to Queen Elizabeth.
First, I talk with Janet from Linen and Needle about her bespoke 13th and 14th century tailoring and her heraldic embroidery. I'm joined now by Janet Weeks, the proprietor of Linen and Needle. Hi, Janet.
Hiya, how are you?
Oh, well, you know, we're all bearing up, aren't we? We're keeping on.
Yep. I must admit, I've been more busy since the lockdown than I was before. I think
Yes.
People have gone through their kits and found out, the damaged ones, the ones that really need replacing. But it keeps you on your toes.
It certainly does. And that's what we're missing at the moment, isn't it? That contact with the public. We love talking about what we're doing. We love showing them what we can make and what our skills are. And we're really missing that. So what are you working on at the moment, Janet?
Well, I've got a Burgundian dress in pure silk, lined with silk and linen.
Oh, wow.
That's coming together really nicely. I got a full lot of outfit from one gentleman. He's wheelchair bound. And because I do bespoke, I can accommodate things like that, buying off the peg doesn't work for. I've got a 15th century Tudor dress in production. So, a bit of variety. I don't like just doing the same thing over and over again. I find that boring. Somebody gives me a challenge, I can get my teeth into it. Do the research, make sure it's right. And
I'm envious of your fabrics in your time period. I really am. I long for a brocade, Oh, that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes you just don't know where to stop and stop your research and think, because there's enough in 50 years, never mind 150.
I got boxes of accessories, like the girdles, the garters, the veils, the pins. I've started making pin holders because I don't know about you, but I lose pins like mad.
I've seen your pin holders. Gorgeous silk. Gorgeous.
And they're padded inside so the pins slide in neatly and then you can close them. And because the fabrics on the outside are either embroidered or you could put them down and nobody will know they're not at the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure they would have had something. They find more pins in the Thames than anything else.
Really? That's really interesting.
Yes. It's the most common find is where women have lost pins or they've used pins for sewing and the industry has chucked them out. And so pins is the most found unit that's going.
There's our fascinating fact for this interview. I love that, Janet. What's the sort of process you go through when you want to add a new item to your repertoire then? How do you research it?
Basically, I've got about 150, 200 books sitting in the corner.
Oh, lovely.
And I start reading. I like not only just reading books with patterns and designs in, but also reading some of the comments, like, why were people taken to court for wearing something they shouldn't be? The sumptuary laws are fascinating, because you can work back then from that of what they were actually doing. And basically you start from the underwear upwards, because even today, the underwear you wear changes the way the garment hangs.
Yes, I can see
you
that.
know, so different types, especially with the women, different types of bras will make the garment hang completely different. But, you know, talking about authenticity, the fabrics around then are no longer produced. So how can we be absolutely authentic? What we can do is interpret with what we can get today, and make it look right. The only real garments we've got are in museums, and they would have only been from the top class or the clergy. You didn't have the everyday's workers' garments, because basically the cloth disintegrates in the ground. And when they do find bits of cloth, it's brown because the chemicals have reacted. So all they can tell us is what was the dye in the first place. But it can't tell us what mordant they were using to produce what colour. So this idea of, you know, oh, they didn't have that colour, other than the day glow ones, there's no way of telling. The only colours we have are paintings, and that's a different type of colour. So when it comes to clothing, and then they never show you the back, only the front or the side.
Of course, yes.
You know, you're trying to work out, how did they get this to fit?
Yes.
What am I placing in this? What? How did they close it? You know.
Yes. Wow, I never thought of that. Well, of course.
I have seen one picture of a gentleman wearing a doublet. He's got a hook, like a hook and eye, underneath.
Yes.
And of course, they can make them by the blacksmith, let alone the silvers. So yes, they had hooks and eyes. Well, I can do a straight clothing now, because I can prove they had hooks and eyes. I come from a sewing background. I studied at the London College of Fashion and Clothing Technology for 3 years and got all my certificates there.
Wonderful.
So we were doing production, pattern making, grading, tailoring, all that side of it. So when I look at a picture of a garment, my brain automatically goes to, how would you put that together? You can't stop learning. And then somebody finds something like they did a few years ago with the underwear that was found in the 15th century castle where they pulled up the floorboards. Oh, yeah, we got underwear.
Hooray!
Took a long time to convince people they had underwear. You know, you got words that mean different things today than they did then.
Yes.
And the easiest example of that is girdles.
Oh, yes.
When I think of a girdle, I think of what my mother wore to hold herself in to give a shape.
Yes.
And it was underwear. And then you read they were crusted in great jewel. Girdles are actually the fabric belts women wore from the 13th into the 15th century. They're the highly crusted, highly embroidered belts that hang down the front,
yes,
near enough to the floor, and that's a girdle.
What is your favourite item to make? So you said you like investigating things and trying new things. What out of what you create at the moment, do you most enjoy getting your teeth into?
The thing I'm making at the moment. the
Oh,
newest thing.
yes.
They're all different. You
Oh,
know,
lovely.
somebody might come and say, right, I want a doublet. Sounds fine. Do you want it in velvet? Do you want it in, linen or canvas? And every one then works out different. Because I'm not doing kind of production runs of the same thing all the time,
Yes.
the newest thing is always different. I've done things for museums, and yes, I'm proud to have a gentleman up the ladder at Godalming Museum, all dressed in 15th century carpentry,
Oh, wonderful.
because that's on show, and it will always be on show, and they'll never grow out of it. Mind you, it's fun carrying the mannequin down the street.
What did you put on him then? What was his 15th century outfit?
So he had joined hose in a black wool, and then a brown tabard. The hat that went with it was a sugar stack,
Yes.
and a coif underneath that. So, and then a linen shirt underneath the wool surcoat. So he looks quite nice. They've actually got a video of him up the ladder on their website. So
Oh,
I'm
fantastic.
quite proud.
Yes.
I shouted at the television the other day because they had a program on, and I saw one of my hats walking around in the background.
Oh, how fantastic. Yes, I love that. Love it.
I like doing heraldry because it's always different shapes and different ways of doing. You don't get two lots of heraldry the same.
Oh, I'm glad you segued into that because you touched on your embroidery a minute ago. So you're in your heraldic embroidery, your other types of embroidery. Talk us through that, because I have got a little bit of your machine noise to play in the podcast. I do.
It does make a bit of noise. Yeah.
So what sort of commissions do you get for your embroidery?
Basically anything. I've got one at the moment that he wants a game mat with all the wording across top and columns.
Yeah.
Or you go on to Matt Lewis's surcoat that I made to go on top of his plate armour with the bird down the front and ermine down one side. And that whole thing was embroidered.
Yes.
And it's all on velvet, fitted to, so it's like a casing of the armour.
Yes.
I was quite pleased on that one as well. But all my embroidery is done in-house. I've got a person who does all the programs for the machine, so I can do any design somebody wants. I did do one that was, it was 4 foot by 5 foot banner.
Wow.
With gold wings coming out the side and a sword down the middle. And I use the embroidery machine to do all the dagging round the hats.
So what's dagging?
Dagging is where you've got cutouts of pieces of cloth. You're showing your wealth because you're showing you can waste fabric.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. The more fabric you can waste by having big sleeves or bits hanging off or things like that, you're showing you can afford to waste fabric. That's what trains are about.
Yeah.
The trains on the back of the dresses.
Yes.
It's showing I can afford to waste fabric. It's all dragging across the floor.
Yes. So your customers are from a range of different backgrounds. You've got reenactment people, film and television people, museums.
Yes. I've done work for Sky TV.
Yes.
I did some surcoats for them on one of their golf tournaments. They had 4 people fighting each other, and I did all the tabards for them. I've got more than one piece of work in museums. Did a lot of children's garments for Bishop Wells, so that children could come and get dressed up in garments and feel what it would have been like walking around the centre.
Oh, how
in
fun.
the 14th century. That was fun.
Yes.
I did help. One of my friends was making a 16th century dress. I did the top one, she did the lower levels, and that went over to a museum in Holland.
Oh, wonderful. You mentioned there as well, collaborating with other traders, and that's one thing that I really do like about artisan making, is there is a sense of collaboration across the genres in a way.
I love being part of ARM because the traders are so friendly. They will help you out. They will talk to you. You know, even when you're breaking down at the end of the day, if they've got 5 minutes, they will come and give you a helping hand.
Yes.
And Georgina is doing a lovely job of making sure there's someone there to help you. You're not stuck on your own.
Yes, and she's on it all the time, isn't she? If I messaged her now, she would reply within 30 seconds, I'm sure.
I don't know anybody else that organises events that has put themselves out and into our position of trying to help us as much as she has.
Yes.
Becoming more like a family of traders.
Oh, yeah, it's that trader family. I love that. Yeah.
You know, so we'll all try and help each other out if we can do. It's lovely being able to create something out of a flat piece of fabric.
Oh, yes. What reenactment group is that then, Janet?
I belong to the Medieval Combat Society. They're a 14th century, which is why I started with 14th century garments.
Wonderful.
Yeah, somebody bent over and their clothing gave, and I've always got a needle and cotton on me. And I said, I'll give it over here and I'll put it together for you. And it was, oh, you can sew. That was the end of it. That was the beginning of linen and needle.
Oh, superb. I love that.
At the moment, most of it is being done over the internet.
Yes.
And they can contact me on linenandneedle.co.uk anytime.
So, Janet, I hear that you don't just do 14th, 15th century. Is that right?
That is correct. I've even done some World War II.
Oh, yes.
A friend of mine works for a charity shop, and she does Goodwood Revival.
Oh.
So she goes in World War II outfits, all the dungarees and the dresses and things, and I make those for her.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah, I it's just a span, you know.
Well, it's because of your experience as a tailor, really, isn't it? A dressmaker, is you can apply that experience, knowledge, pattern making to any time period, really.
Yeah, basically, you know, if you know the basics. Yes, sometimes you have to be careful because, again, when you're going into the 14th century, 13th century, they didn't have darts. Fitting was all done through the seams.
Right.
And if you're actually doing the seams correct, which none of us do, they're actually worked from the outside inwards.
Oh.
So you're getting French seams.
Yes.
So they're sewn on the outside and then turned over and under. They were more practical. They worked things out. You know, they couldn't have built castles if they didn't know what they were doing.
Yes.
You know, the darker the colour, the richer you were, as a general guideline. The lighter the colour, the poorer you were.
Mm.
So they wouldn't have been in dark brown. They would have been in yellows and pinks and pale blues and
yeah, like washed out colours. Yeah.
washed out colours, because they were the third, fourth dye of a batch.
Yes.
You know, and if you get to black, the reason behind that being an expensive one, it takes 3 dyes to get it to a black. So yes, that's why the clergy and the royalty took black, because it was an expensive fabric. And women were sat around did embroidery all day. Yeah, I don't think so. Except if you were paid to. You know, the best embroidery was done in the 13th century.
Oh, wow,
and
yes.
Production line.
Yes.
That's what I didn't realise.
Oh,
is the person who could do facial features did all the faces in the work. The person who could do the way the cloth folded on garments and things did all that work, and it would be passed down to the person who was working on the next piece.
Oh, wonderful.
So, but if you look at the embroidery in late 14th, early 15th, you'll find not so many facial features. They're normally the heads are turned slightly.
Oh, okay, yes.
Or the stitches are a lot bigger than they are in the 13th century. And that's unfortunate because the Black Plague happened in the middle and they lost half the embroiderers.
Gosh, that's interesting. Yes.
So if you were doing a commission and you'd lost the person doing the face, you would have had to find a different way of doing the face.
Oh, gosh.
They reckoned that 90% of the trade that was going on London Bridge was women doing silk work, which would have been embroidery and tablet weaving. Edward III had 5 embroiderers on his payroll in the armoury alone.
Wow. Oh, I love that fact.
So, you know, embroidery was very, very important to them. And when you read the Century laws, how many different stones they were using on their garments.
Oh, yes, yes.
So, you know, bright colour stones were definitely around. And then you go into the 15th century where somebody's being prosecuted for making false pearls.
Oh.
And they were using eggshells and glue,
yes,
making false pearls, and they were being done for it. So, you know, the copycats were around then, just as they are today. People being done for making wool cloth, but using dog's hair.
Oh, wow.
So, again, sometimes reading the law and who was being done for what can actually tell you what was acceptable in that time a lot easier than reading some of the history books. So it would be reported to the sheriff. He would then fine you for wearing something that wasn't right.
Yes.
He'd take it away from you and give it to the person who's reported.
Oh.
If then you saw her wearing it and she wasn't in the right category, you tell the sheriff, he finds her, and you get the garment back.
Gosh, so if you see something that you've got your eye on,
yeah, basically. And the Century laws only lasted about 3 years.
I can imagine that.
And actually, it was not so much keeping you in place, but bringing in taxes.
Oh gosh, right.
Because if you're wearing something you bought from, say, France, the English king isn't getting his taxes. So if he's restricting it so you can only buy English wool, he's making sure he's getting his taxes. If you had to earn so much, and the ploughman was only allowed to wear English wool, but the hierarchy could wear the Italian wool.
And then it helps you to advise people on their kit and where they're going with their own status and things like that.
Yes, yeah. You know, my website, it's got both linen and needle and forgotten beads on it. I've got some beautiful pictures of the embroidery up there, and also some information about things you would have been wearing in the 14th, 15th century.
Wonderful.
Hopefully it will help people. And if anybody's out there that's got garments of mine and got pictures, please can I have some?
Absolutely. I love hearing people passionate about what they do. Keep up the brocade.
It's great being talking to you today. And I'm looking forward that we can actually meet up and have a coffee and tea together.
That would be wonderful, so long as there's cake or a flapjack at least.
Ooh, yeah. Give me a nice carrot cake or a cheesecake and I'm well away.
Lovely. I'm there. It has been wonderful. Thanks, Janet. I'm now talking to Paul Baker from Diabolus in Musica.
Perfect.
Practiced about 5 times. So all of your instruments handmade by yourself in your workshop. What first interested you in going down this route, Paul?
Oh, well, it goes back a long way. I took up the recorder at school the way everybody else does, but I never gave it up. And I ended up with a diploma on it. And then I got in with a bad crowd and started playing crumhorns, and then started coveting hurdy-gurdies and Renaissance guitars and things. And then it gradually dawned on me that these things were blooming expensive and I couldn't really afford them. So I just have to make them. So I started making them.
And how long have you been making them for now, Paul?
40 odd years, something like that.
So where do your musical instruments date from? What's the earliest one you make, Paul?
Yeah, the earliest one of the lot, it would probably be something like a psaltery, I think. But hard on the heels of that are your Gitterns and your Citoles. The little medieval lap harp is sort of one of the early ones. And then I go right through the Renaissance period, right up to the Baroque. And in about 1780-ish, I stop, because it all gets dreadfully modern then.
So not only making the instruments, but playing some of them.
Just a few.
Yeah, just a few. Sometimes with your pals from A Merry Noise.
Oh, yeah.
Who I had the pleasure of talking to the other day.
I import them sometimes, and sometimes they import me.
And that's what I like about reenactment, is those connections you make, the different places you meet each other again, and also the wonderful venues that we get to be at. And I'm quite jealous of your era, because you get the mansion houses.
Yeah.
You know, nice things.
All the places with roofs.
Yes.
It's good. It does
Handy.
help, especially in bad weather.
Yeah, and a nice fireplace to be aesthetically placed next to.
Yes, there's nothing like a half-timbered wall for standing up against and swanning around.
That's it, swanning, and in costume swanning around. There's nothing like it.
Of course. And of course, in our case, making noises. Hopefully pretty noises.
Absolutely. Have you got a favourite instrument to play, Paul?
My instrument really is the recorder. I mean, it's a bit strange, because most of the instruments I make, I don't play, or at least not up to much of a standard. Now, the recorder's still probably my main instrument, but I mean, you know, I like shawms, I like bagpipes, and the hurdy-gurdy is the one that always draws a crowd.
Oh, we love the hurdy-gurdy. Shall we segue into a bit of hurdy-gurdy?
Let's do that.
Stunning.
There we are.
There we are. What I like about that is I just want to get up and dance around in some kind of square formation now.
Oh, it's a great dance instrument. It's fantastic. Yeah.
What kind of events do you find yourself playing at?
Oh, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs. You know. Actually, no. I have had serious inquiries for a funeral, and I have had serious inquiries for a bar mitzvah, but I've never actually done one. But weddings, reenactments, you name it. Anybody that's got a purse of coin who will press it into my palm, that's the way it goes. At the moment, it's completely dead. So I'm spending all my time as a recluse in the workshop, making the little beasties to make nice noises with.
Christmas, of course, that was a big one. The musicians for to be missing out on this year.
I actually did one gig at Christmas.
Oh, good.
Big posh hotel down Reading Way. Christmas Eve it was.
Lovely.
Very small audience. It's extremely strict social distancing, but it was quite idyllic.
And where do you ship your orders off to, Paul? Does it go all around the world?
There's in Singapore, Singapore's got a few of them. There's a couple in Japan. There's a few in America. There's a couple in Sweden. There's, yeah, basically all over the place. And quite a few in the UK.
One thing I noticed on the video you sent me of working in the workshop is the amount of intricate woodwork, obviously, that goes into an instrument. So you had tapering wood, inlaying wood together, different coloured wood strips together.
Yeah, that's just the pretty bits. I mean, it just gets that one. Once you get a reputation, then
for being pretty.
Well, yes, people start wanting a bit more than the usual standard model. You know, can you do a really pretty rose? And hey, I've seen an inlaid neck. Can you do one of those? And yeah, and then of course the latest one is, can you do a carved head? You look at the work of some of the master carvers, and it's just unbelievable. And particularly some of the 16th century stuff is just jaw-dropping. But I can turn out decent carvings if people want them. But most lutes have just got this peg box and it just stops. But everything else, Sittons and Gitterns and you name it, the end of the peg box curls up and you put something on it, like a carved head or an acorn or a squirrel or something. I
like that. Bespoke peg boxes. I like that. Personalised.
Yeah, it's. I get all sorts of requests, but yeah, we can.
How long does it take you to make an instrument then, Paul? Or is that an opening a can of worms type question?
Well, it depends on what. It all depends on what else I've got on. But very broad average, about a month. It depends on the instrument. Something like an Orfarian will take more than a month and a half, 2 months, something like that, because it's fiddly and complex and awkward and pernickety and very, very pretty. Because you've got inlay and stripes and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, possibly a couple of months, but about a month.
Oh,
not that you can actually have an instrument in a month, because the trouble with doing this is you end up with a waiting list, and it's very inconvenient. I'm now quoting 10 months.
Gosh.
That's that basically means if anybody orders one now, they might just get it for Christmas. People, particularly scholars and academics, and my mate Ian particularly, who's doing a phenomenal amount of research into instruments, they see something in the iconography and say, "I want one of them." And nobody's ever made one of those, or at least not for the last 500 years they haven't. And we don't know how it's made. So that's another thing.
That's really intriguing. So if you don't know how it's made and you don't know quite what it is, how do you know what it's supposed to sound like?
Well, essentially you don't. It depends when it's from. If you've got, 16th century instruments, particularly late 16th century instruments, there are survivals. They're not playable, but they can be exactly reproduced, so we're pretty sure, and of course there's music for them, so we're pretty sure that a sort of late 16th century vihuela sounds the way it did in the 16th century. Once you get past 1500, it starts getting a bit more conjectural. You just have to look at later models and think, well, yeah, it works the same, so it's got to pretty much work like this. That's what you're restricted to. But I mean, essentially, if you can get really, as accurate a drawing or a carving as possible, and of course that depends on the painter. You've got people like Hans Memling and Hieronymus Bosch to a certain extent, although he tends to distort things, but they put a lot of detail in. So you've got somewhere to start with. A lot of the early medieval stuff, you've got a crabby illustration that sort of could be a cat if you didn't know. So it's more and more conjectural. But I mean, spending a lot of time making the later ones gives you a lot of sort of information you can feed back onto the earlier ones.
Oh, I like discoveries. Go on, tell us a discovery.
There were only 2 surviving Gitterns. The Gittern was really popular. I make 3 different types, sort of 13th, 14th, and 15th century style Gitterns. There were only two surviving Gitterns. There's now really only one.
Oh.
Not because anything's happened to it, but there was one found in Poland, which was the second surviving Gittern, but I've now more or less proved it's not a Gittern, it's a Cobboz.
Oh.
Eastern European, you can call it a variant of the Gittern, but it's got no frets and it's got a very wide string spacing, and they're still played, but they're much bigger now. But you know, you find all these things. So
let's segue into some Gittern. Shall we go 13th, 14th, or 15th century?
I'll let you pick.
Well, from my playing earlier, I quite enjoyed the early one.
Go for it. That's the Cantigas one.
Well, I've gone back in time, Paul.
Oh, yeah.
Fetch me something. I just feel like bossing people around now. Don't know why. I just felt like I was an elevated status type person. Don't know. So these instruments are a combination, seem to be pluck and strum and play them in those sorts of ways, much like a guitar.
That's most of the instruments that I make. I'm a string instrument maker. I mean, I play all the wind instruments, but I don't make them because there's only so much time in a life.
There is, Paul. I mean, you sound busy.
If anybody's thinking of putting in an order, put it in now before the workshop list gets even longer. Right,
Paul, where can people find you on the internet if they want to have a look at examples of your work?
Diabolus.org. That's the best. That's the website. I'm on Facebook as well, but Diabolus.org is if you go to that, that's got everything and links to everything else.
I just always think the public always want to know the behind closed doors type, you know.
Warwick Castle.
Oh yes.
We did Warwick Castle regularly for about 4 years. We did the summer entertainment, and there's quite a lot of tales about that. I mean, when we got there the first year we were booked, they didn't really have changing facilities for musicians. So we changed in the office of the operations manager. That was it. We'd sort of get in there well before the public were in, get into our gear, and then make our way out through what's called the Royal Weekend Party exhibition. Now the only problem is the offices, of course, were private, and then you just open a door and you go out into the main corridor. By which time, very often the first few visitors were making their way through, and they would see part of the panelling open and two Elizabethans standing behind it.
Brilliant. Oh,
We never actually caused an actual heart attack, but that was that was the one. There was
nobody expects the Elizabethan musicians.
We used to do a little set at 2 o'clock on the one side of the courtyard, because we knew exactly where the shade of a cedar tree went, and we stood under it. And it was quite a good amphitheatre. 30 or 40 people could gather on the path and listen to us if they wanted to. We could see this guy with some sort of hold all eyeing us through while we were performing for the last half of it. And we thought, hello, what's he want, you know? And he was really intently. I mean, he didn't really seem to be listening particularly to the performance. And he sidled up to us the moment we finished, and he said, I wonder if you'd have a look at these for me. And I thought, what? And he rummaged in his hold all and dragged out a set of Highland bagpipes.
Oh, wow.
I don't play Highland bagpipes. I play medieval English bagpipes and Renaissance German bagpipes, but Highland bagpipes are a bit of a mystery. But I thought, well, all right. He'd been up to now what was he? He was French, but he'd been up on a visit to Edinburgh. And he bought these things from a shop, and they really needed a lot of attention. So I told him what attention they needed, but then I asked him, well, why don't you play French bagpipes? And of course, he'd never heard of French bagpipes, because the French are inveterate bagpipers. They've got about four common types of bagpipe. So we were having this discussion, and I was trying desperately to get something out of these Highland pipes for him. And then there was a Taiwanese woman who came up who happened to play bagpipes.
Wow.
And he just got sillier and sillier. And then, of course, one of the peacocks decided that he didn't like this noise, and he decided to fly in and join in.
Oh, goodness. What an audience.
And it just descended into complete farce, which was rather nice.
So you were part of the exhibit, but you made your own exhibit in the end. Love it.
We were actually, we were brought in as queue entertainers.
Is there a part of me that misses queuing, Paul? I don't know. Is there a part of me that misses the British art of queuing?
My favourite activities.
Mind you, I queue for the post office now and then, because there's only 3 people allowed in our post office. It's only little.
You have to, but it's not something I like particularly. It's much better now with smartphones.
Yeah.
Because I can Google stuff while I'm queuing.
Yes, very true. Yeah. Excuse me, very important work going on. How many types of bagpipe does France have? Yeah, Sally. Yeah. I once knew a bagpiper, and he was came from, I think, Scandinavia, but I met him in Australia, and he skateboarded as well, and his act was busking, skateboarding, playing the bagpipes. It was quite good.
That can work.
It was good when he was going away from you.
Well, that's the sort of thing that you want the Highland pipes for.
Yes.
It's allowed.
Yeah. When you robe up, Paul, what century kit is your go-to? What do you like to wear the most?
Late 16th, ideally. That's but basically because the music is really nice. The instruments are superb. It's just really nice music. I'm always drawn to the late 16th century.
Shall we hear some late 16th century? What should we listen to?
Well, you already, but when you played the hurdy-gurdy, that was late 16th century. You want some posh stuff?
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely.
Have a look. There's a little clip of the Renaissance guitar, and that's played by my mate Richard Mackenzie, who is a seriously good player.
That's phenomenal, and that is one guitar, because it's got a real
that's one guitar. I mean, when we play it, it's a wonderful instrument. Is the Renaissance guitar? It's sort of legit from about 1530 up to probably 1630, something like that 100 years. but it was used for everything. We've put Renaissance guitar behind choirs, bagpipes, shawms, recorders, you know, you name it. It just seems to, it's proper little workhorses, the Renaissance guitar.
If I was to put a Renaissance guitar and a modern acoustic guitar next to each other, what main differences would I see?
Renaissance guitar is very much smaller. It's roughly the size of a uke.
Oh, really?
Little bit bigger than a uke, but not much.
And what are the strings made from?
Well, nowadays they're a specific plastic compound called Nile gut, which has been developed by a guy called Mimo Perufo of Aquila Corte in Italy, to exactly, well, as accurately as possible, replicate the characteristics of natural gut, because what everybody really wants to play on these instruments is natural gut. I mean, he's a fourth generation gut string maker anyway, so you know, you can still get these things, but gut has got a few problems. It doesn't like humidity, and it doesn't like changes in temperature, and the retail price index affects it, and you know, it's actually fine for reenactments, and it's brilliant sound is gut. But if you're playing a concert, because they didn't really have concerts in the 16th century as such, if you're playing a concert and you need to walk on and do sort of 30 seconds tuning and then play, gut is a little bit problematic, because the moment an audience walks in, of course, the humidity will change. I usually tend to string in this Nile gut, which is very good. It sounds 95% like gut.
So I'm going to pick up on what you just said there about not playing concerts in the 16th century. So,
well, yeah,
what was the venue?
There wasn't really such a thing as a concert. You either played music yourself. I mean, it's not that. Oh, there wasn't a formal concert.
No.
You know, if you were a nobleman, you had musicians, or you bring in musicians if there was some event, and they would play as and when you wanted them to. There's the inventory, which it blows my mind. I don't know whether it'll blow yours, because you get this. I mean, when you talk about the 16th century instrument makers and Stradivari, you know, and all these the great names, you sort of imagine a guy, probably with an apprentice, beavering away in a garret somewhere, you know, and lovingly crafting more or less what I do, you know, an instrument a month.
Yes,
probably turn it.
That's exactly what I'm imagining, Paul. Right, dispel that myth.
That's the sort of general perception. Guy called Laux Mahler, when he died, they had to make an inventory of stock. So in stock, this guy had 1,100 lutes, 1,300 soundboards ready to use, barrels of staves for the back, which he was obviously subcontracting. And he wasn't just making lutes. He was renowned as a lute maker, but he made viols, violins, guitars, you name it. It's a job to know exactly how much production that represents, but you're not going to hold in stock more than 3 months.
That has blown my mind, Paul. I'm now trying to think.
If you think of shifting 1,100 lutes in 3 months, that's sort of 400 a month. It's about 100 a week. Now that is a factory. That's a factory by modern standards.
That is a factory.
It's not some guy in a garage. It's a huge instrument making operation. They must have been turning these things out. I mean, yes. I reckon he had 100, 200 people working for him.
Absolutely huge. And then also the export market on that, because you'd saturate Germany, wouldn't you, with lutes?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and in fact, that actually happened. The Tiefenbruckers, there's a family of luthiers. They upped sticks from Germany and went across the Alps and set up in Italy, and then probably tried to saturate the Italian market.
I love that, entrepreneurial luters.
Shall we just say, if anybody wants to see anything really pretty, look up the Citole on my website. It's a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of controversy about Citoles. I'm fairly convinced that there were at least three pretty much different instruments called the Citole. It's really awkward because you look at medieval manuscripts and they are not going to say this is a Citole. You've got a picture of an instrument, and then probably in another manuscript, these things are mentioned. So up till, basically up till the 1960s, the Citole and the Gittern got completely mixed up. There's one surviving instrument, which is really, it's about 1350, I think, called what used to be called the Warwick Castle Gittern. It's not a Gittern, it's a Citole. It took a lot of delving and really in-depth research by a guy called Lawrence Wright to sort it out. But fortunately, there are a number of illustrations which pretty much correspond to the one surviving one we've got, which is in the British Museum.
Wow, yes.
And it survived because it had got phenomenally intricate carving all over it. Nobody was going to throw that in the firewood. It might have been obsolete and nobody played Citoles anymore. But because of that carving, it was actually it was owned by the Earl of Leicester, I think, who owned Warwick Castle, I think, if I remember right. It was gifted to Queen Elizabeth. But you can't really give the Queen a Citole, so unfortunately they ripped the soundboard off and turned it into a violin. It was really lousy violin. It was actually tested at some point in the 18th century by a guy called Charles Burney, who was a bit of a music historian, and he pronounced it to be a pretty atrocious violin. Horrible, which is hardly surprising because it was never designed as a violin. But anyway, it was a usable violin. So we lost the soundboard, but actually we lost very little else, and we've actually still got the body of an actual surviving Citole, which is like hen's teeth. Wow. There's only one. On the website, there is the reproduction of the British Museum Citole. If you have a look at illuminated manuscripts, you've got these little, what they call marginalia, which is funny little animals doing funny little things. And there's some seriously weird stuff. I'm sure they're on something.
Absolutely. The things that cats do in those margins.
Rabbits with swords and shields. And snails is another one.
Oh, yes, yes.
Mainstream stuff like wyverns and things like that, and mermaids, but you've got all these weird things. So I put a few of those on, and I put a mermaid on, and I put an angel on, and I put a few fighting rabbits.
Oh, fantastic. I love that.
It's nice, isn't it?
It's so nice.
The sound is unique. But while I was carving it, I was thinking, why on earth did they make a body this shape? It's really complicated and very strange. And it's got this thumb hole, and you'd never invent something like that. You know, it's just a thoroughly odd shape. And then, of course, when you hear it, you think, oh, that's why.
Oh, lovely.
It's the same period and about the same sort of size as the Gittern, but it doesn't sound like a Gittern. It doesn't sound like anything else.
Really nice to talk to you, Paul. Stay safe,
Likewise.
look after yourself, and see you with the Citole in a field somewhere, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Artisan and Reenactors Market. The Arm family welcomes new traders, groups, living history and performers. See the website armarket.uk. All music from this podcast series is provided by A Merry Noise. Find out more about their medieval, Tudor and 17th century music on their YouTube channel and their website amerrynoise.com. Asking the questions has been me, Jen from Drakosdottir, and also Norfolk, to explain the accent. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to your company next time.